to Agritecture's travel-free digital conference series. I'm Brianna Zagami, and I'm Agritecture's media strategist. And today I'm here with Carolyn Zezima, who is the president of NYC Foodscapes. And today we're going to talk about small-scale gardening. So hi, Carolyn. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, hi. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we are actually neighbors. We're both in the East Village in Manhattan.
Yes.
A lot of community gardens around here, so it's a great neighborhood to be in and talk about urban ag.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can wave down the street from
If I
our
stand on
isolated.
I can probably see you.
Exactly.
You have an interesting background. You are a chef and you're also a lawyer. So can you tell us a little bit about how you went from A to B and maybe use those past experience now in your work in urban ag and food justice?
Oh, it's a long and wild tale, but yes, I will try to keep it short. I obviously went to law school like a lot of people did out of college and practiced for a while, including private practice and a prosecutor. But I took an opportunity to go to chef school a while ago. And so I was a chef for a while, but one of the impetus for being a chef was actually the whole, what they used to call seasonal eating. So seasonal eating was almost like a precursor, if you will, to sustainable agriculture. So I went to chef school and I was all about California. I went in California, all about local California, seasonal cuisine, etc. But, you know, at journeys as it is, I ended up going kind of back to the law to New York. And even on another journey, I ended up marrying a man in Chicago where I kind of merged it all together and started a nonprofit called the Talking Farm, which is an urban farm that's absolutely thriving now in officially Skokie, but really on the border of Chicago. And that was kind of bringing in kind of almost seed to policy and organizations, and it was the kind of the early stages of urban agriculture, even in Chicago. I think New York was a little ahead of the curve, but so it was one of the first urban farms in Chicago, maybe the first 5 or so. Back in New York, I've been doing a lot of that, and I do it, like I said, from seed almost to, you know, grass tops and everything from policy to actual gardening and teaching gardening, because I feel like that's the whole food system you have to see from seed to plate and even into policy. So
Yeah, it all starts with education. So
yeah, a lot of you know, going with the wind as the seeds often do, but that's the nature of food systems.
all right, so why don't you take it away with your presentation?
Sure, let me share my screen. I will get it up and running. Let's see. Slideshow. We'll start from the beginning. So I thought, you know, these series that you guys are doing are great, and there's a lot of great, very future-forward, high-tech ways of creating food and things that I'm reading about and hearing about, and I, you know some of that. But I thought, I don't know, especially in light of this COVID kind of nightmare we're in the middle of, that we still kind of need to almost step back and go almost low tech. So instead of almost looking at scalability, it's almost the opposite, like going small and going local, hyper local, and also just reclaiming as much as we can some degree of, I don't know, sovereignty over our own food system. So a lot of us, especially in New York and the cities, but any place may not have a ton of outdoor space to grow food. So one of the, you know, there's a lot of food you can grow in very small spaces. I've done this presentation a ton of times at gardening conferences. It's always very popular. But we're going to focus on a few methods, mostly just for your illustration purposes. You can always contact me for more detailed instruction, but we're going to go through a few methods and things that you might be able to do, people might be able to do, and how much food, you're going to be shocked how much food you could actually produce in these small spaces. And, you know, we've used community gardening and gardening in general in a lot of times of crisis. You know, the victory gardens, there were wartime gardens in World War I. During the Depression, there were this what they called thrift gardens. So even having just a little space, and you'll be surprised, you can't feed your entire family necessarily on it, but you can grow a lot of food and really supplement a budget, especially as things may start to get a little bit harder. The first one I want to focus on is a straw bale garden. And I learned about that after Sandy hit our community garden, Campos Community Garden, and destroyed all the beds. So that was that. It flooded. And a school gave us a grant to kind of help repair it, but we had already gotten from anonymous donors around the city funds and in-kind donations to fix the garden itself. So we decided to use the school's grant to create a children's garden. Being later in the season, we had to get it up and running, and that's another benefit of straw bale garden is you can get things moving pretty darn fast. So a space had opened up sadly from when a tree fell, and that created more sunlight. So we actually decided to make that the place for the children's garden, and we used straw bale to start a garden. It's a perfect temporary garden. It lasts a couple of years. It turns to compost, completely biodegradable. It's a great height for accessible, mobility impaired for children. You can put it on patios, especially if you don't have a lot of places to dig a garden. And if you fertilize it right, if you prep it right, it is extremely fertile, great for summer vegetables, great for greens, great for a lot of things. I'm going to show you a couple of examples before I show you how the gardens are made, but you can make an herb garden. Here's somebody, this is not ours, but tomato arches. You can even use them as rows to grow the bigger vegetables. And it's, it does require a little bit of prep. It's actually relatively inexpensive. A bale is anywhere from $10 to $15. You need some fertilizer, organic fertilizer, blood meal, or chicken manure. That's a little harder to find, but something that's very high nitrogen. You prep the bales for about 10 days by adding nitrogen on a regular basis. And then you water it to keep it moist. After it's kind of really gotten itself real fertile, you can top dress it with some soil and compost mix, and it's ready to go. It's an amazing amount of vegetables that you can fit into a bale. So what's a bale? By like, I don't know, 3 feet by 1 feet by, and it's high. You can fit a couple of indeterminate, being bigger tomato plants, or smaller determinate tomato plants, 2 to 3 pepper plants, several greens, bean plants, peas, bush bean, cucumbers. You can put them up against a wall so they can climb. You can grow almost everything, but root vegetables don't do so well in straw bales. And maybe in the second year of this bale, they might have a little bit more nutrients, but otherwise, I don't think that root vegetables do too well. So let me show you something. This was 11 bales at the garden. This is the amount of food that we grew in 11 bales, and in essence, about 50 square feet if you go by the number of bales and the size of the bales. So that's a lot of darn food in one season in one very small space. Like I said, I have more detailed instructions on a longer presentation, which I am welcoming you to email me. I have the contact information at the end. So here's some of I don't know if anyone, I never actually asked anyone here today, have any of you actually gardened at all? Because this is how easy it is. I mean, I've never imagined that you could grow an eggplant in a straw bale, but you literally put in a eggplant seedlings or plants, seeds, and they are very fertile, and you can grow a lot of different things and in very little space. So the next thing I want to talk about is the herb spiral. When we created the permanent garden, we put a space in the middle that would be kind of a conversation piece. So we had a 5-foot round circle, and what we decided to do with it is build an herb spiral. And for a couple of reasons, it's again an amazing amount of growing space in a small area. That's about 25 square feet in that small space, if you could believe it. You can maximize growing space if you can grow a diverse amount in a very small space, because you're kind of leveraging microclimates. So for instance, if the plants that face north and are on the bottom are a little wetter, and they can take more the cooler, less sun, and on the top you have the drier, hotter vegetables. It minimizes the amount of water because it uses gravity, and it's absolutely stunning, as you can tell. So we decided to make an herb spiral one season, and that lasted about 5 years, and now we've actually replaced it with a Three Sisters garden, which I will talk in my longer presentation. There's information about Three Sisters gardens, but the herb spiral is just magnificent. We had the boys club actually create CAD documents, and we built the herb spiral to spec. We got the bricks, etc. And also you move, you move up, adding stones as you go along, and you make it maybe around 3 feet high. And you don't fill the whole thing. That would be a waste of soil to fill the whole thing with soil. So toward the bottom, in the middle, you would, put bricks and old stones, and then put soil on top, and then top dress with compost. Again, you kind of follow the sun. So the northern and eastern plants would be best on those sides. I mean, on the east-west, you would put the more shade-tolerant plants. The hotter, larger ones you would put up in the top, so they won't crowd out the sun of the others. The creeping plants, you can have them cascade down the sides. And then, of course, you would do the companion planting to attract the bees and help the other plants grow. So same thing, when you see how much we fit, you do not need to read that. That is 24 plants we fit into this herb spiral of every flavor you can imagine, from rosemary to chives to chamomile to cilantro. And that's what it looked like immediately after it was planted. Oh, and then we also put a strawberry cage, I guess you'd say, in the middle. So then strawberries would come out and the kids could pick them. And this is it in the throes of summer, absolutely spectacular. And they just wouldn't stop producing, especially the mint. The mint did get a little carried away, so I do warn you about that. And it's hard to control. The next garden method I want to talk about briefly is square foot gardens. They're in the ground usually, so if you have a little plot, that would be the best. And that is literally the amount of food one can grow in a 4x4 spot. And it's very diverse. It does require quite a bit of planning, though. Let me show you the next slide. But if you're really good with, say, processing information and protocol and when to plant, this is a really great garden for you. This was a square foot garden that I did, where you literally measure out every single space and what is going to go in there. And then as soon as each plant is done, you take it out, add more fertilizer, and replace it with something else. So for instance, in square one, 9 spinach plants were going to be replaced by 9 seeds of pole beans, and similarly. And it is you can literally, 1 or 2 people can almost fulfill a lot of their vegetable needs on a square foot garden space. But again, it requires discipline. It requires keeping track of the vegetables, and once they're done, pulling them out and eating them and replanting right away. So it is a highly productive garden and can produce an incredible amount of food in a small space. And the last garden I want to talk about, because a lot of this presumes you have any outdoor space. I'm lucky enough. Another question, actually, does anyone here belong to any community garden in their cities, either New York or anywhere else around the world? And or do you, if you don't have any garden space, have you thought about where you might want to garden? Well, if you don't have access to a community garden, another option that is emerging, and this is kind of, now we're jumping back to tech, are these smart gardens. Um, uh, I mean, and this is actually even beyond just having grow lights and growing, under grow lights. I happen, and full disclosure, I happen to be on the board of advisors of a company called Plant Hive that operates out of Belgium, that's creating these pretty wild controlled environment urban farming devices. And you can, it's not just a hardware company, it actually is going to, it actually has software and AI capability to help the plants grow. So there is this idea that at some point, metropolitan households are going to engage in some kind of indoor farming. It's just going to become a necessity. So this is there to serve that kind of need and to help educate consumers about ways to grow food inside themselves. Some of the features of some of these interior, controlled environment smart gardens, they're obviously eco-friendly. They use LED lighting. You can control it with your device. It's customizable, and a size, you can grow various sizes of things. It's kind of gamified, if you will, so you can create climate recipes to optimize your yields. There's you can either grow in hydroponics or in soil, depending on what you want to grow or your preference. And obviously, it's educational. And amazing amount of variety of things that you can grow inside these internal smart gardens, from microgreens to herbs, salads, those are peppers, exotic plants, in places where it's obviously legal. It's an ideal cannabis growing system. And you can start your seedlings, even if you're going outside, you can start your seedlings way earlier than, let's say, and have them ready to go and ready to replant. So it's a very ideal system for apartment living, like in New York City, where again, I have a community garden, but I don't have any outdoor space of my own other than that. So so that's just the highlights of what I wanted to present, because I feel like even just having one container garden where you feel that you know what you learn what you can about what you can grow, your capabilities. I feel like right now, just to have that is very reassuring. I don't know about you. And this is why I chose this topic. I could have gone more tech, I could have gone green roofs, but I feel like taking it to the most basic, let's grow our own food this season. It's getting time to start the plants. So I have plenty more information if you want. You can email me at nycfoodscape@gmail. On my blog, there's more information about the herb spirals and the square foot gardening, but I have detailed instructions on a longer version of this presentation that I'd be happy to share with you. And if you want to find more information about Plant Hive and the smart gardens like that, there's their website. So I'm hoping you guys have some questions and we can talk more about this. Or Brianna?
Thank you. Wow, I am truly amazed by the straw bale method. I thought I had seen it all in community gardens, but I had not seen that. And it's amazing how much food you can grow. I definitely consider myself a home grower, and I hope that our viewers have learned a little bit about how easy it can be to grow at home or get involved in a community garden. You can't see, but I have a ton of plants. I have mostly herbs and lettuces that I've started growing indoors.
Oh, wow.
I personally don't have access outside. I could go up to our rooftop and start planting, but I used to have tomatoes and some fruiting and flowering plants on my fire escape, which
Oh, wow.
I don't know if that's legal, so I'm not going to recommend that to everyone. But if you can still have enough space to, escape a fire, that's also a great way to utilize space in New York. But I'm so glad that you talked about both indoor and outdoor farming methods. agritecture also has made it easy for home growers to purchase a system that they can grow food indoors, and that's through our Plus Farm. So you can
Oh,
check
wow.
out plus.farm for more information. I'll let our audience do that kind of research. But, you brought up Hurricane Sandy, which I think until now, that was kind of our last disaster that took place in this city. And, I've heard a lot about how community gardens played an important role for creating food security. But I'd like to hear, like, how are community gardens adapting now to our current crisis and these uncertainties of food security, especially during a time where we're kind of really just starting to plant. We're in springtime here in New York. The sun is just starting to heat things up. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing with your garden and how you've seen people responding and maybe engaging more in community gardens? So what have you been seeing happening?
Now this is one of the downsides of this COVID, is that the most of the community gardens are officially owned by the city and operated by the New York City Parks Department via Green Thumb NYC. What they did was very smart, though. They actually left how to operate, whether to keep the garden open or not. It's definitely not open to the public, unfortunately. They've made it clear that right now community gardens are not open to the public because it's hard to maintain. It's not like the members would have to be there and maintain the 3 to 6 foot rule. So, but gardeners can decide amongst the members whether to keep it open. And we, for instance, have decided to keep it open, but we went through kind of a rigorous, I'll even show you a process to create our temporary guidelines, and they're pretty rigorous for operate. We have to be obviously gloved up, sanitize everything before and after, which is kind of sometimes antithetical to the natural garden world. But right now we want to be safe, and it's very important that we feel still connected to the earth. So I've planted the children's garden. Unfortunately, this year is obviously probably not going to see much, if anything at all, maybe not until the fall, if at all, activity. So we're going to dedicate a lot of that space to actually growing food for as much as we can for ourselves, and for what is permitted under any city rules for the public as this unfolds. So that's still up in the air, right? But it's very important that we get a ton of food to those who need it anyway. So I know that the city, the Office of Food Policy, and et cetera, are starting to work on, and food active organizations are starting to advocate, Karen Washington, a bunch of people, on how to get food to people, and especially in the gardening world as well. So that's been happening. Unlike Sandy, where the whole thing was to dig right back into the earth, we have to be a little more careful this time. And we do have rules about keeping only 3 people allowed in the garden at a time. But once it opens up again, you can join our garden and start growing your own food again. Oh.
Yeah, I definitely should join the garden too, since I'm right here. The garden that Carolyn is talking about is on East 12th and Avenue C. So if you're ever in the East Village, definitely check it out.
Oh, definitely. Once it reopens to the public, you're more than welcome. We have garden hours, or will again. And it's a beautiful garden. It's also a very sunny garden, which is why we grow a lot of food. Again, once it opens, I'll let everyone know. But you will see some of the things that you saw today.
So would you say that the city is actually trying to leverage community gardens to grow more food to anticipate any shortages that might happen? Or have they been, activating community gardens at all? Or what kind of response have you seen from the mayor's office in regards to food security during this time?
I think right now, initially, and rightly so, their first reaction was safety. We just have to be safe. So again, unfortunately not open to the public. Gardens can make their own rules. I think ours actually, and I did share them on ComFood or whatever, but are pretty well stated rules. just yesterday, and that's another webinar that someone should see, the Hunter College for Food Policy did do a great presentation about what are the issues. And I know that the Office of Food Policy is going to be starting to implement some programs that are going to respond to COVID. And Karen Washington was on, and she was, there to speak for the farmer, because she's a farmer now, she Rise and Root Farm, and also for gardeners as well. So I think that it's very important, I think that the gardens start really growing food for the, and that there should be a way to safely get it to the public. And that should be worked out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so, we spoke about this a little bit before the call, just kind of talking about what's happening in New York in regards to food policy. And New York City has created the Mayor's Office for Food Policy, and they've also created some legislation around our 10-year food plan. So I wanted to hear from you a little bit, like what you think this means for food security and food justice in New York, and what we can expect to see in the next 10 years.
Again, the real person to ask is Kate McKenzie on that one. So I highly recommend that people get in touch with the Office of Food Policy in New York City. I think it's great that they created a framework for this. They always had for the last at least 10 years, they've had first it was the Office of the Food Policy Coordinator, then the Food Policy Director. Now it is an actual Office of Food Policy. So its entire mission is directed toward creating a food policy plan. I know the City Council had adopted a resolution or et cetera to create the framework for a food policy plan. I don't know where that stands. So that's a Kate McKenzie question, as I said. But talk about the need for one, something like this where there's resilience built into the system. That's what a food policy plan would do. Again, engaging the community, putting the stakeholders at the table, that's what a food policy plan would hopefully do. And that's exactly right. I mean, the people who are going to benefit the least, the people with the least access, the least, the voices that are rarely heard, those are the ones that really need to be engaged in the food policy planning and in the food system entirely. So hopefully the food policy plan will reflect that. That's why I think gardens do need to be, there was a great ongoing work about the urban ag plan, which was also created. I don't know what happened after Espinal left. So that's the one thing I don't know the status of and where it stands. But the first round, people were not entirely thrilled that it didn't engage the community and gardeners. So the second round seemed to be going in a good direction that actually engaged the gardeners a lot more. And that all urban ag should include people on the ground growing their own food.
I agree. You can't have effective policy without having the local community members involved in that decision-making process. You can't have outsiders coming in and deciding, the fate of an outside community. So it's definitely important to make sure that people's voices are heard.
And again, obviously, we need more production than just a straw bale garden to feed the city of New York. Right. But the psychological, even the cost cutting. I mean, again, think about the amount of food that you could produce in those. Those are really big parts of many people's budgets, especially a square foot garden. If you can really cut down on your purchases with something like that, that's really a lifesaver in the summer for a lot of families. So any kind of growing that people can do is really, I think it's an important act. It's an act of food policy.
Definitely. You can really help those who are struggling towards the end of the month and aren't sure where their next meal is going to come from. And they're getting access to healthy food. So it's not just, they go to a bodega and get, $1, processed meal. They're getting the nutrients that they need to stay healthy.
Absolutely.
That's important as well. Creating nutritious and healthy food and making sure that it's accessible to all.
Well, that's why a lot of this too was based in education now it's really about production, but it was based in education so that young palates could start to, delight in foods that they haven't tasted and things like that. So that's the first step, is creating that, like, I want that food demand out of the community that they will then not tolerate any less.
Yeah, and learning how to cook with raw vegetables. I think that's something that I take for granted, is that, I've learned how to cook before, and then I can, create healthy meals for myself, but not a lot of people have that luxury and don't really know where to start when it comes to that. So, yeah, education is definitely the start.
On my blog from a few years ago, or a couple years ago, are the most adorable videos of the kids engaged in a mystery basket, where it wasn't they were cooking for themselves, they were cooking for the opposite team. So it was adorable. It's beyond the most adorable thing you've ever seen. So I highly recommend people check out that just for fun, because what else
I'll
are we
have
going
to
to do?
share. I'll find that link and I'll share it with everyone.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited for the community gardens to reopen to the public.
I
For
know.
me, living in the East Village, it's a place that I feel like I can just forget that I'm in the city. You're surrounded by nature. I go and I read a book. There's 5 within, a 1 block radius to where I'm located. So definitely encourage people to check them out. Carolyn, can you provide any resources for people who want to get more involved or volunteer at a community garden?
Absolutely. I actually, if you contact me at the email nycfoodscape@gmail, I will connect. I have another presentation. It just doesn't really work right now, in the sense that people cannot gather today
Yeah.
and start to create community gardens. But I have a wonderful presentation on how to create community gardens in all places. It was for a national audience, actually, in the affordable housing community. So it applies anywhere. Like, these are things that people in other places, these are suggestions, tips, ideas of where you can, and resources to create and expand your community garden. So absolutely, I will share links to previous presentations and the like, if they want to contact me. That would be great.
Awesome. Well, thanks.
Excellent.
Before we
Well,
sign
thank
off,
you.
do you have any final thoughts or any other information to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to dwell in the COVID aspect of it, because I want this information to be forever. But this is, a time where I just want people to, there is something, even with my gloves and the spray. I mean, it is something wholesome, and I don't wholesome and life affirming and the like, to be putting seeds in grounds and starting plants. And so I was just, even if you're not going to end up doing that, just know that there are good people growing your food. You'll get your food, and it's going to be a little bit of a long haul, but in your, in your apartments and your homes, just dream of nature, and it will get through this. So, when we'll grow together, happy well.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's actually, I planted a couple of herbs because I just felt like I needed to get my hands in the dirt. I'm getting a little bit of cabin fever here.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a good sense of therapy. So if you guys are feeling like you're, kind of trapped in your apartment with no real connection to nature, I definitely recommend filling it up with some plants. Try to grow your own. It's really satisfying, to be able to watch your own herbs grow. And I feel like it tastes better when it's grown by
Yes.
itself. So
Absolutely. All right. Well, excellent, folks. I hope you guys start growing soon.
me too. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.